So, good morning. Today we will be reviewing Spanish colonial Philippines during the 17th and 18th century. So, as this was explained to me, um, our approach will not be linear. So, it means that you won't follow a consequential state of events. No. So, we will focus on the general characteristics, changes, and policies that they imposed within the 17th and 18th century in the Philippines. And they will also be tackling, of course, other countries, especially Mexico. No? So before that, we have to sort of imagine what a town looks like. So uh, way back, no, towns were used to be called pueblo. And in pueblo, there are three main components, no? The municipio, or commonly known as the municipal hall, uh, pwede ring city hall, but that will be for later. Iglesia is the church, no? Which is, of course, the Catholic Church at the time, since dati ang pwede lang na religion is Catholicism. Lastly is the plaza. So, plaza, yun yung, kumbaga, park, to say the least, sa gitna um, ng pueblo. So, if you've been to Intramuros, for sure, you've been to Plaza Mayor, near the Manila Cathedral. That's one example of the plaza, in the pueblo sort of layout. Although it's important to note, of course, that Manila was a city; it was a ciudad. Pero yes, that's the basic layout, no? Or rather, the layout na you would often see in various cities that were found in in Spanish era. Uh, this is, of course, seen further when we compare cities that were made after the Spanish era. Let's say Quezon City. Quezon City was made, if you've watched, let's say, the Quezon movie, it was made in accordance to the will of the Commonwealth government, no. Kaya generally speaking, historically speaking, dahil hindi ito umabot sa Spanish era, then we could say na wala silang ganitong konsepto. Although, yes, arguably, we could say na, plazas in Cubao or Diliman, di ba? Technically, dahil nga Spanish era to, Quezon City doesn't exhibit this cultural layout. No. Alright. So, going back, if a town is high class or it has a large commercial area, then it is called a ciudad. As I've mentioned earlier, Manila is a ciudad, no? Since it is the center of the Philippines at the time. And then, another thing to add was the state and church, no? So, pag sabi mo state and church, ibig sabihin lang nun na it is controlled both by the state, no, and the Catholic Church. And if you're not Catholic, you are forced to live in the rural or the mountains. So, yun nga, dati, of course, there was no separation of church and state. Sometimes they are in conflict, sometimes they cooperate. So, minsan nagkakaaway-away sila. Especially if you've read, let's say, if I'm not mistaken, that's No Limit Tangere, no, with, um, sorry, I forgot the characters, pero isa doon yung private, tapos isa doon yung teniente, if I'm not mistaken. Pero yes. And then, realistically dapat, state officials would often submit to the will and power of the friars and priests, since the European legal system, after all, is heavily influenced by laws in the church. Alright, so if your town does not look like this, it was probably redesigned or ruined by war. Ayun. So, like, going back to Quezon City, di ba? Dahil nga hindi siya nabuhay sa ganong klaseng um, consciousness, wala siya, di ganun yung look or yung outlook ng town. Alright. So, the center, what we call, where the plaza, municipio, and iglesia is positioned, is what we call the poblacion or cabecera. This is the historical center of the city or town during the Spanish period. So if you've heard of the nightlife area of Makati called Poblacion, or Pobla in short. Then that was the former center of Makati, or the cabecera of Makati. Next, areas that are far from the nucleus are called poblacion, or sorry, that are far from the nucleus are called barrios. So they are grid patterned and consolidated as well. By the way, yung mga houses near the poblacion are also grid patterned, okay? May mga houses beside them. Later on, we will explain that. So in pre-colonial, they could just move the houses. However, during the Spanish period, residency is now much more permanent and close to each other, and they are gravitated in the nucleus, which is the poblacion. So it is important during the colonial period because they can watch their constituents. And this is important kasi nga, they track, at the time, they were already tracking their taxes, and of course, you also, since they are Catholics, they also have to conform to their way of living, no? Aside from them being Catholic, andun nila ng mga government centers where they could do their, let's say, lawful duties, so to speak. So, ayun. Next naman, we have the doctrine or the parokya. So, basically, this is similar to the pueblo. Pero, on the ecclesiastical perspective, so the church perspective, ano? So, let's say, in barrios, no, priests would often go and have visitas. So, for example, in my father's province, no, of Nueva Ecija, in Jaén, no, Jaén, municipality of Jaén, they are our barangay there has a church, ano? They have a church there, pero wala silang kuro paroko because obviously the kuro paroko is in the city center of Jaén. Sa probinsya, alam ko mas akin yung word na bayan, no? So, doon siya sa bayan. Ngayon, technically, ang ginagawa ng praile doon, ng kura paroko, is they will attend the mass. Pero, syempre, nakasituated pa rin sila sa Jaén or the parokya doon sa center ng Jaén. Pero imagine way back, ano, when that church in the barangay did not exist, and Jaén, let's say, was not its own municipality back then. So, I'm not sure kung sino ang may hawak ng Jaén nun, no? That happens. Right? So, imagine kung kano kalayo ang binalakbay nila just to attend the mass. Alright. And another thing, since talking about that, the visita can eventually evolve into a different pueblo, where a community can request the parish. So one example of this is my hometown. Las Piñas was a visita of Parañaque. So people from Las Piñas would wait for their cura paroko to go to their location, which was around, let's say, Manuyo, Zapote, around the coastal area. Since nandun naman yung buhay dati, ng livelihood, ng coast. They eventually became a separate pueblo because they requested. And I believe their first parish priest is Diego Serra, if I'm not mistaken. Alright. And the bamboo organ. Alright. So, ayan. Now, this will now we will now focus on the town building planning at the time, which is called reducción. No, hindi siya reduction, reducción. Alright. This is the policy of resettlement and villages. So, kumbaga, yung mga dati nga, sabi natin, bayanihan, nakaspread out yung mga well, not necessarily spread out, but they could go anywhere. No? Pero nung sabi natin na we want them to be near the pueblo, or hindi naman near, within the vicinity, kumbaga, nagkaroon ng reduksyon or ng resettlement. So, fire became common in reduksyon dahil magkakadikit sila. It's interesting Kasi before that, the pueblos, or yes, the pueblos weren't made out of stone. So the houses, the buildings weren't made out of stone. If you actually go and look at the signages, or alam ko kasi sa when I went to the Manila Cathedral, meron dong mga historical notes, and you could see the first variation of the Manila Cathedral. It wasn't made necessarily by stones, no? May pagkakahoy din siya. So, as you could see, very common um, tool ang kahoy in building the towns, no? It isn't the thing that you see in Intramuros right now. It wasn't always like that. Pero dahil fires became very common in the Philippines, dahil unang-una mainit, pangalawa, hello, may kahoy. And that's the more obvious one. In Manila, noong 1583 and 1603, fire incidents occurred. So, usually yun nga, because they were built out of wood and nipa, at hindi yun na iba, nagkaroon ng sunog. So, ayan, 1585 daw, nagkasunog dahil may namatay. No? Dahil sa isang funeral, nagsindi ng kandila, nasunog yung bahay. Kawawa naman, no? This is why Manila and homes in Manila eventually became stone. Pero, may problema rin yung stone na buildings. Since stone sila, not to be confused with the cement or concrete buildings, it was prone to earthquake. So, by the 1900s, by the late, naging cement or concrete buildings na. So, by the way, some houses at the time, no, na hindi issue ang fire, nipa pa rin ang ginagamit. So if you go to the provinces, for instance, na may mga nipa houses pa rin na nag-prevail, kumbaga. Pero syempre ngayon medyo, di naman sobrang prevailing compared dati kasi, modernism and such, di ba? So, this is our bottom-up approach, no? Establishments of localities. So before, like nung unang ginawa ang ganitong sistema, meron tayong encomendero, or the conquistador, and the cura, the fraile. So initially, they would rely on a conquistador, on a priest, on a friar. Kumbaga, sila yung parang town leader, ganon. And the reason is because the encomenderos are usually people who are successful in their conquest, and as a gift, no, they are given a community. So, kumbaga, pag encomendero ka, you are entrusted by the community to become a leader of that community. No? So, it was eventually abolished kasi it was very abusive. And hello, 9,000 encomiadas yung pinaka-peak niya, no? Ang dami nun. And then, looking back nga, abusive yung system dahil going here, ideally, dapat ginagamit yun sa pampublikong serbisyo, pero ginagamit lang pala yun para sa pansariling pagnanais, no? Pansariling, kumbaga, corruption, no? So, yan. So, who can help the colonizers? Well, ang unti lang ng mga Spaniard, ng mga Espanyol during that time, the presence of Spaniards in Mexico was much more compared to the Philippines. Bakit? Ang layo. No? Or maybe the Philippines, the weather, the climate, maybe even the people, was not desirable to the Spaniards. So, who helped them? Ito yung mga tao na nag-rule sa Philippines at the time. Aside from the Spanish, no? Aside from the Spaniards, which was the Kadatuan or Maginoo. So, what they did was they sort of told them, hey, can you help us give your land and help us, rule this land, kumbaga. So, nagkaroon ng principality or principalia in these regions. And if you cooperate, you maintain your status, and if you don't, you lose everything, no? Because eventually they will invade you, diba? And they will select a new leader anyways. So, ayan. So, these datus are now called principalias. So, ito yung role niyan, no? So, people follow the principalia and the principalias follow the encomendero. Then again, the principalias at the time eventually, paunti-unti, nagiging ano siya, sort of a ceremonial, no? Naging ceremonial siya. So, one thing to sort of consider there. Alright. So, bottom-up approach naman, citizens has tributes, taxes, the cabeza, the gobernadorcillo, the alcalde mayor, and the governor general. So the tribute and tax will go to the conquistador and donation will go to the friar. So, yung tax daw natin, nahati, no? So, we give taxes to the cabeza de barangay. So, sino ang cabeza de barangay? They are the principalia families. Then, the gobernadorcillo is is also one of those principalia families. And of course, only a very small group of people, commonly the priests, have the right to vote. Siyempre, we consider as Indios, di ba? So, why would they let us vote kung ang tingin ng Spanyol at the time were idiots, no? To say the least. Sorry, I'm finding the right word, no? So, political dynasty can be traced here as well. Kasi nga, obviously, principalias are families. Right? So, forced labor is required. Labor are done by Filipinos since there are only a few Spaniards existing at the time, no? Eventually, the encomienda was reviewed. So, dahil iba ang population count ng Catholic Church, tapos iba rin yung population count ng Estado. Kung wari, may situation na ang mapa de almas, just yun nga, the population count of the Catholic Church has more population, kailangan abunuhan ng kabesa de barangay yung pera sa kura paroko to match the count doon sa padron. So this is, if you review once again, this time, El Filibusterismo, si Cabezang Tales. And if you read, I think, if I'm not mistaken, chapter 20? Question mark? Andun, no? Cabezang Tales. Kaya, di ba parang naging kahiya-hiya siya, ganun. So, yan. So, to complete that entire political structure, you have to check the map. So, next. This is the political structure of the Philippines, no? So, you have to know that the Philippines was under Nueva Espanya. Nueva Espanya is not only the Philippines but also largely also Mexico, no? I'm not sure if meron pa. I'm just a student, pero I'll research on it soon. No? Espanya, ang nag-rule sa kanila is yung king or queen ng Spain, and then beyond, directly to them is the Virrey de Nueva España. Then the Virrey will go to the Governor General of the Philippines. Same goes with the Council of the Indies, create decisions, and then the Real Audiencia will enforce, judicate, and they have the power, no, general power to rule the country. Of course, subject to the will of the royal structure of Spain. Okay, so the announcement is obviously delayed since matagal bago makarating sa Pilipinas. This is why, in replacing the Governor General, it will take months or years to replace. And at the time as well, they cannot go to the Indian Ocean, no? So that's another thing because of pirates, no? And also because, if I'm not mistaken, there are also other colonies there, so magkakalaban-laban pa sila. So yun ang importante. Next naman is the colonial economy. So the economy of the colonial era was mainly by exploiting the Indios through tributo and bandala, and of course polo y servicios. So tributo is very direct, you give a tribute. Okay. Bandala, on the other hand, is the same as an IOU. If you're familiar with the IOU, yun yung kumbaga nangutang ka, ganon. Kung in recent in a more modern context, nangutang ka sa mare mo, sabi mo, mare pa utang, no? Tapos di mo ibinalik. Basically, Parang ganon. So they don't get paid dahil the government lacked funds. Ang thinking is that they will be given these notes, but these notes are just notes. No? Hindi sila mabayaran anyways. Next is the podo y servicios, or the forced labor. You can pay falya to be exempted, from forced labor. And of course, church contributions in the form of donations. So remember ang tributo, 'di ba, sa state binibigay, tapos ang donasyon are church contributions. So this is also interesting. Galleon trade. I think he will stop on the galleon trade, no? The silk silver exchange was the heart of the Philippine economy. This was between the trade between China and Mexico. This is why it's called the silk and silver exchange. China gives the silk, and Mexico, with their mines, have the silver. And the Philippines was a transshipment point. So this is because the Father Andres de Urdaneta found the route to go from Spain to Mexico. Urdaneta, I believe there's a word Urdaneta in somewhere in Metro Manila. Urdaneta Village ata in Makati. I'm not sure, but this is more known in our country as a city in Pangasinan, if I'm not mistaken. So, ayun. This is why we have this, no? Bahay kubo. Yung mga vegetables sa bahay kubo ay halos from Mexico before wala sa Pilipinas. In return, Mexico received Philippine, kumbaga, delicacies and Philippine practices like sabong and tuba making. Tapos, it eventually stopped after the Mexican Revolution and their independence from Spain in 1815. Dahil dito, nawalan ng economic output yung Pilipinas ulit. And maraming nagalit dito. Ano? So later, on our next video, we will explain the Filipino revolts.